Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to Open Room, our virtual sessions. This is July's edition, and I couldn't be more excited than to have Minou here with me. Minou and I have been trying to get this conversation in the diary live for all of you for a few weeks now, and her and I share so much passion for this conversation. So, Minou, thank you so much for coming and going live with me today.
Very nice to be here, Mimi, and indeed, nice that we finally made it.
We did. We finally made it. So to everybody tuning in, we normally take about half an hour in our open rooms and we have an open conversation about a topic of interest, which is sometimes it's leadership, sometimes it's culture. Today, Minou and I are going to talk about empathy because we both share a great passion for what that means in the world at large. Please do ask questions. Please do add comments. Our team in the background is going to pop them on screen and we will answer them and we will engage with you. So please do send them over. But Minou, let's just start with a little bit of a backstory. Who are you? What do you do? And how did you end up in empathy?
Yes. So who am I? I think first and foremost, I'm a woman. I'm a mom. And in my professional life, I have worked in a humanitarian emergency response for many years. And since 2017, I run my own coaching business, training leadership, mainly leadership development, do a lot of that. And particularly where I also, of course, connect with you, empathic leadership, conscious leadership, and emotional intelligence. And then that's what I do in my daily life every day with the clients that I work with, and particularly around functional empathy. And I think that's where you and I also connected about, the applicability of empathy and the realness of empathy in work life or in the world at large, maybe.
Yeah, in the world. And I want to come back to that because I think for most of my audience, at least that I know are probably here today, that practical, what does this mean in leadership and business is always really appreciated. But before we get there, and to everyone listening, we will get there. I want to go back, Minou, to some of that NGO humanitarian work that you did, because that's kind of how we discovered some of our shared passion for the roots of empathy and where empathy comes from, right?
Yeah.
And I remember you telling me a story, which I would love you to share, about being in a refugee camp and about coming across a lady drinking her morning cup of tea outside of her tent.
Yes.
And I would just love for you to share that story with more people than just me about that experience, set the scene for us and how that connects to empathy, self-empathy, just what it means for humanity.
Yes, I think because, the word empathy, it became such a buzzword. And I think eventually empathy is really in its essence. It is the glue between people. It is what makes people connect and really see each other. And I think that example that you're referring to, it was such a beautiful moment because it showed the simplicity of how important it is for people to connect just on the simplest things. I was in a refugee camp in Lebanon, in the north of Lebanon, visiting with a media crew because they were coming to film the work that we were doing there. And there was a woman sitting in front of her tent with her cup of tea. And we were talking about, like what makes you able to get through life when you're uprooted and you have to leave and you cross the border with your family. Her children, by the way, didn't cross the border with her. They dropped their children across the border in a different location legally because, of course, refugees are just coming to cross the border. And she crossed through a different entry point and later was reunited with her children. So just to give you a bit of an idea how volatile that situation is and how risky and how unpredictable of where that goes. So she was sitting in front of her tent drinking her tea, and I asked her, like, what makes you go on and what makes you really feel that this is going somewhere in all this misery and terrible place to live. And she said, you know what, this 10-minute cup of tea in the morning in the sunshine, that's where I reconnect with hope and with belief. And so we talked a little bit about that, and then she showed me her tent inside. And there was a lot of media people around and a lot of men around. So that was always a bit awkward somehow also for her, for people to have that kind of presence in their very hard lives. So we understand. And she had, 7, 8 children. And it's a tent of 4x4 meter. And I asked her, like, wow, that must be so tough to live here together in such a small space. And she was explaining it to me a little bit. And then I asked her, I said, what do you miss the most? What do you miss the most about your life? about being here. And then she laughed and she pulled me aside and she addressed me in Arabic, because I speak some Arabic, and she pulled me aside and she made a joke in Arabic saying, being intimate with my husband. And it was such, and we laughed so hard. It was like an intimate women moment. We talked, and the people around us were asking, like, why are you laughing? Like, what did she say? But it was a little bit of secretive situation between them. There was so much connection in that moment. And I think sharing the essence of understanding. I understood what she meant, being in this space and missing that intimacy with your partner. So there also the ability to connect and human aspects that we all understand. It doesn't matter where we come from or what we have experienced. There's things that we all understand in what we need in our survival, in feeling happy and feeling joyful, in the things that give us meaning in life. This is all stuff that we all understand. So that was a beautiful moment that I had with her in that sense, in that camp. Yeah.
Just such a fundamental human connection, right? And people ask me all the time, Minu, can you run out of empathy? Is there such a thing as too much empathy? What if I don't have any empathy? All of these things. And I'm always reminding people that empathy is something we are born with, right? It is built into your prefrontal cortex. This is a human evolutionary skill set. And stories like that one, Minu, just sort of remind us all that if you slow down, if you listen, right, these moments exist around us all the time. Do you feel the same in the work that you're doing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like you said, some people feel like they have too much empathy, or people don't have empathy, they lack empathy, they don't know what to do with empathy. But maybe that's where it comes in, the evolutionary skill set. And with functional empathy, we also talk about empathy as a skill set. It's not like this magical thing that you have or don't have. You can learn to apply. Also, when you are an empathic person, it's not always easy to be empathic, and it doesn't mean that you know what to do with that empathy. So that is something you can learn, whether you consider yourself very empathic or not.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that gap between the capacity to be empathetic and then the skill set to use that empathy, right? And that is often, I think, for many people listening, and please do add your comments or share your questions there in the chat box. We'll pop them up. It can be quite difficult, right? In the workplace, you may feel that you're quite an empathetic person, but to actually use that under pressure, under time, as a leader, perhaps can be a real pressure point. And as I said, I want to come back to that, but I do want to spend just a few more minutes at a more human level, looking at that, because I know in your humanitarian work, you shared a story there, and you've come across many examples of it. Minu, in the work you did, you had some quite traumatic experiences, right? Because anybody that's living in a refugee camp is living with trauma, and you were there with them. I would love to understand, how did you see empathy between refugees? Because people tend to talk about refugees as if they're just, I don't know, a group of friends. But of course, we forget that these people have never met in their lives. All they share, arguably, sometimes, occasionally, is a country of origin, and often not even that. Sometimes they speak the same language, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they share a culture and sometimes they don't. And yet now they're living in towns and almost cities in these environments. We talk about empathy as this human skill set, this innate ability to connect, to understand. Tell us a little bit more about your experience of seeing that in these environments where you are really seeing kind of just authentic humanity come to life, because it is, I guess, the bones of humanity that you're working within.
Yeah. I think what you see is that people, they are especially in tented settlements, right? This is like very harsh environment. People depend on each other. It's a survival. It's pure survival. They need to make it work together somehow to survive collectively or as a group in a certain location. So it is a very somehow grassroots way of people coming together and forming a community, and somehow starting up from there, whether it's where do the tomatoes come from, or, where do we find water? And a lot of these things are very collective effort, that nobody was taught or learned or to live and to perform under under these circumstances. And you remind me of a conversation during my coach training in 2017. We were talking about, acknowledging and validating and acknowledging people's experiences. And this was in the context of coaching skills. And somebody asked, but then isn't this very privileged, this conversation about all these skills and all the things that we learn and, purpose and meaning in life? And because what about people in refugee camps? Like they have like hardcore survival situation. And then we talked about that. And I think two things. One thing, we talk as refugees as a group of people, but they are just individuals like you and me. They have a life, they have a family. It's not like a group of people that we perceive somehow as a homogeneous group. They are just people like you and me, like your neighbors, like your sister, like your brother. And they try or have to make it work somehow together. And the other thing, if anywhere where hope and inspiration and the belief that there is something else possible is needed, it is in these communities. You have been there. You have been in so many places and you have visited so many harsh environments. It is so important that people keep somehow a sense of hope. Look what's going on in Gaza. Where do people find still hope and believe? So I think especially in these communities, that's what people also can create together somehow through all the hardship. That a sense of community also creates maybe a sense of belief that it can go somewhere, that something will change.
And I thank you for sharing that. And yes, you're right. I've done a lot of work in refugee camps and in extremely underprivileged parts of Africa, where there's such extreme poverty and destitution. You're absolutely right. There's this just unrequited need and belief in something bigger, right, and in something better. And when I talk to my audiences about empathy being pro-social, because we are a pro-social, existence, what you just said brings that to life so beautifully. I want to ask you a little bit about listening, Minu, because I'm not just because this is my passion, but I just so deeply believe that listening can change the world, that it will change the world, that it just changes everything when people feel heard.
Absolutely.
Let's set that again in these difficult contexts. It can be in any of your NGO work or community work, whether it is tented refugee camps or anywhere else you've been working, but people who have difficult scenarios, because once we've started here, I want to take that to the workplace.
Yeah.
What is the role of listening? How have you seen in those environments that simply patiently, actively listening to people creates impact or change?
I think first and foremost, because the humanitarian sector in itself is very good at thinking what is needed and believing that they know what is needed, that we as humanitarians know what is needed. And I think this has been a big challenge in the humanitarian sector always, but especially in recent years, that the humanitarian sector is also questioning its own relevance. And I think that's where listening comes from, because where does change come from? Change always comes from inside, and people know what they need. People know what is needed to create change and to get to a better place. So I think listening in the sense of humanitarian work, truly listening is not hearing so you can perceive the information you're looking for. Listening, really listening, is turning all your own assumptions and all your own ideas and all your, minimum standards and all your ideas of your humanitarian context where you come from, to let it all go and to actually really listen what a person is trying to communicate, what the community is trying to communicate, and take that as a starting point for the work that we do with people. Because eventually we are providing support. And I really believe that the ownership of the process and of what people want to change or address in their communities, that ownership should be with the community. And for that, you need to listen. And you don't need to listen just for information or for your learning. You need to learn to listen to what matters to people. What are their values? What matters to them in life? What is important to them? What do they care about? And take that as the information to build actually something that is supportive to them. So listening there is crucial, especially not selective listening, but turn off your own, what information am I looking for, but what is actually somebody really saying, or a collective community.
Yeah, and one of the things we hear a lot about in the media, Minu, in the kind of more corporate world, is this idea of unconscious bias and being able to overcome bias. And one of the things I like to remind people of is that I mean, bias as a word is a loaded word. It's a very negative word. You know, it really makes people feel heavy, like, oh gosh, I have biases. But I always explain to people that in my opinion, all of us have biases. You can't turn them off. It depends on how you grew up, the experiences you've been through, memories, love, all kinds of things, right? But
Absolutely.
to truly listen, you have to be able to overcome bias, or at least put your biases aside to be able to truly listen to someone. What do you think about that? And how do you think how can they do that? Because it is hard. We all do have bias. How do we put them aside in order to listen better?
I think the most important thing is to realize, or give yourself the gift maybe, that listening is not for you.
Yeah.
Listening is for the other person. So
Yes.
the only way to truly listen is to realize this is not for me. Unless you're listening because you need information. If you're trying to learn something and you need to onboard information. But if we're talking about that, the kind of listening that you're talking about, to connect with people and to make people feel understood and heard. And I want to link that later maybe to predictive empathy. Really listening to people because it matters to them, not to you. So your bias, it doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter where you come from or what your own ideas are about something, or how people should be dealing with what they're dealing with. It's all completely irrelevant when you're listening. When you're listening, you can put your bias aside. It doesn't matter. It's about the other person. It's not about you. And I think in coaching work, that is a skill that you learn to build, is really that put everything aside, like you said, and make the listening about the other person. And then your curiosity comes alive, because then you're getting actually curious about that other person instead of listening to all the stuff going on in your own brain.
Yeah, right. Listening to understand versus listening to reply is what I always sort of put into my workshops. And I always ask my audiences, just think about that for a minute. Are you listening to understand? Or are you listening to reply? And it's amazing to see people just sort of click. And how often, Minu, people come up to me in the breaks, the tea break, and say, Mimi, I never realized I'm such a bad listener. And last week I was in Sri Lanka, and one of a very senior vice president, female participant, and she made the whole room laugh, but she had the microphone. I was asking questions, and she said, you know what my takeaway is, Mimi? And I said, what? And she said, I think this is the first time I've listened in my life. You know, the whole room obviously laughs, but she went on to explain, you know, listening to you today teach us how to do this. I suddenly realized that as a leader, but also as a mother, and I think it's a really interesting point, I've never been listening. You know, she said to me, I feel like I'm a really good mum. I love my children deeply, but listening to you today explain what this is, I think you're right. I think I listen to them to reply. I listen to get their information, and then I tell them as a mum, okay, cool, so this is what you should do, right? Rather than actually listening to my children to really understand, what are they communicating to me? Do I need to solve this for them? Or do I just need to hear it with them, you know? And I think that differentiation is quite a light bulb moment. Do you resonate with that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially the part that, to take the example of being a mom and listening often is so much built on the idea, like, which role do I have towards this person, or do I think I have towards this person? So towards our children, we think we need to fix something, we need to solve something. So we already listen with the assumption that it is our role to fix something. So we're listening with the ears of, what is the information I can sift out here so I know what I need to do to fix it, and we respond from that. And that's also why we develop these roles. Like, what role are you're normally playing? My partner is a fixer. Always like listening to fix things. I'm more like a helper, maybe, and that's a different thing. But so where are you coming from, and what do you think is the role that you have towards this other person? And Mimi, maybe also in the humanitarian sector, or generally in service-oriented or care-oriented professions, the people that end up in these jobs are people that generally are empathic and they want to care for others. Yeah. But if we look at the dynamic that often exists for people who are very empathic, they want to help, they want to fix, they want to be there for others. And who are the people that find them? Oftentimes people in need of something. So I think it is super interesting to question those roles, and the question how we are listening. Because if I always keep listening to everybody with the assumption that I need to help people, the people who need help will find me, and they will keep confirming my role as a helper, and I will keep confirming their role as in need of help. So being able to step away from, okay, am I listening to help, or am I listening to really listen here?
Why am I listening? Talking of listening, there are 2 questions there. I'm just going to ask my team in the background to leave those questions up so I can read them, because you flew them up there. Thank you. So Owen, thank you. I read the beginning of your question as it popped up just now, and this is such a big question. So I have some thoughts, but I'm going to let Minu also have a look. So Minu, Owen is asking us, how does a person balance offering sympathy with setting boundaries to protect your own well-being? So I guess whether it's sympathy or empathy, which are slightly different things, but how do you sort of balance up some of these skill sets with boundaries? Any thoughts on that from you, Minu?
Yes, I think that's what we refer to as the cycle of depletion, when this doesn't go right? So we give a lot, we give. At one point, we're done giving. We have depleted ourselves. So we go to this cycle in the second step. After giving, we have depletion. We feel depleted. We feel tired. We might feel burned out even. And we might feel not supported. And then we kind of rationalize the whole situation. It's okay. We understand why it is like that. We have a lot of things in our heads that justify why things happen that way. And then we go back to start. We go back, we reload our batteries a bit, and we go back to the beginning, and we start giving again. I think, what is most important is when you're empathic and caring for other people matters to you, this has to do with your values, with who you want to be as a person. And as long as the things that you do serve your values and who you want to be as a person, and it contributes to your well-being, your own well-being, then you're doing a good job. But when you are giving more than is healthy for you, then that is coming probably maybe from a place of either wanting to be liked or wanting to belong somewhere, or give it a name. There's so many reasons why we over give to people. So I believe as long as it is coming from a place of a healthy, values-based interaction with others, that's great. Setting boundaries, absolutely important, as you said, for your own well-being. And how do you do that? I believe that starts with checking in. Is this coming from a place of value and who I want to be? And is this contributing to making me feel happy and fulfilled? Or is this draining me? And that's the first step to it is, if it contributes to draining you, then you can say, okay, I have to look at my boundaries. And how do you do that? I think one thing I do with my clients is an exercise that's for 1 week when they're being asked, and a lot of my clients never say no. They all say yes to everything. I ask them for 1 week, if somebody asks you, can you help me do something? Whatever it is, at work, at home, you say, if you need an answer now, it has to be no. But if you give me some time, I'll get back to you later today or tomorrow, and I can see if I have time for this. And it's a life-changing experience, because we are so used to just always engage and say yes and go into things.
Yeah. And I mean, thank you, Minu. I think even for me, that's a really mind-opening sentence. I'm not sure I'm ever going to be able to do it, though, because I am totally in the helper camp. So I'm like, yes, I can help. Yes, I can help. Yes, I can help. Owen, it's a good exercise. Owen, I want to add 2 thoughts to Minu's answer. The first is that empathy and sympathy are very different things. I just want to sort of define those for a minute, because it's a very common question and also misconception, in that empathy is a skill set and sympathy is an emotion, right? If we simplify that down, right? So empathy is your ability to lean in and close the gaps because you are understanding somebody else. Sympathy is feeling for them, right? And it's the same emotion as pity. So they're both very adequate, very valuable parts of being human, but they are very different. And I think for you to think through that, Owen, is also really helpful. Am I empathizing, which is a skill set to understand other people? Or is that moving into sympathy or even compassion, which is then an action? So really understanding those things, I think, is important. And the second thing, Owen, I want to add, because I find it really, I don't know, inspiring for me, is something that I call reverse empathy, which is that generally the more empathy we show to others, the more empathy you get in return. Now, this is, of course, not 100% foolproof. You will always meet people that do not have the capacity or interest in empathizing with you. But I do find that if you are feeling that need to set boundaries, it may be because you are not getting that reciprocal empathy from other people. And that might be worth just considering, why is that? Is that cultural? Is it emotional? Is it the work context you're in? So just some thoughts to add there. Before the next question pops up, because I know there's a couple in the line there, I just want, Minu, you spoke earlier about, I think you said predictive empathy. Did I get that right? I would love to hear what that is, because it's the first time I've heard that.
Yes, so predictive empathy, it really looks at if we take empathy back to a skill set, and why empathy and why empathic leadership? Why is that so important? And then a lot of people have this vague idea, okay, then I just have to be nice and listen to people, and then what? And I think predictive empathy is great. Why? Because predictive empathy highlights that being empathic with people, so investing in people, being emotionally intelligent, listening, really understanding the operating system of a person. Who are you? Who is Mimi really? What does that help? It helps me predict future behavior as a leader. If I really know who you are, next time something happens that is challenging, whether that's whatever, with a strategy that needs to be rolled out, or with a proposal on your plate that you're not happy with, whatever, anything challenging that happens, if I have invested my empathic skill set or my empathic skills in you, I know I can predict how you are going to react. And I can respond to that. I can intercept that. I can say, I know this is coming. Mimi is going to have a moment tomorrow. So I can call you tonight and say, hey, this thing is coming up tomorrow. So, and that's a small example, but knowing people and understanding their internal operating system, because you cannot dismiss that from a work or any situation in life. Everybody is a person, and that helps you predict behavior in the future. So it's super helpful for leaders to understand how to apply empathy as a skill set, so they can learn really to predict where their team as a group goes in the future with all kinds of situations, and to help them navigate that in a supportive way that matters to them and that is helpful for them.
Yeah, I just love that. And I think people often ask me, or just ask in general on LinkedIn and other platforms, about resilience, and how do I build resilience and how do I create resilience? And when I hear you speaking about predictive empathy, that's what it feels like to me. It feels like it's going to enable us to be more resilient as leaders and senior managers, because we have some safety net of intellect, actually, that's allowing us to, like you said, predict, understand, feel comfortable with behavior that might be on its way or might be responsive to a particular decision-making reality or change or shift. And of course, in today's business world, there's a change every minute. So I feel that predictive empathy is a really nice way to also look at how you build your resilience. So for everyone listening, definitely go on and find Minu's page and find out a little bit more about that if you are thinking that perhaps resilience is something you might want to work on in I know what are very changing times all over the world. I know to my team, I know there's another question back there somewhere because I saw it pop up. There we go. So what self-reflective practices can I engage in to enhance my empathy? Brilliant question. I'm going to hand it over to you, Minu. What can people do personally to improve their own empathy?
Oh, well, there's a multitude of things. I think first and foremost, let's start somewhere. I think it is always important, also maybe in relation to empathic leadership. What is the role that we think we have? Like we talked about a little bit earlier. What is the role we are assuming? Who do we think we have to be towards other people? And I really challenge also the people that I work with. I challenge people on that. Write down 3 to 5 people in your life. Different people, work, family, friends. What different roles are you? If you want to learn about roles, by the way, you can find this on my page. If you want, there's 8 roles. So what roles are you taking on towards these different people, mostly? And question that. Why are you taking this role? Why do you feel responsible to respond in this way or in that way? And what would happen if you take on another role? If you are a fixer and you always find yourself fixing things as soon as people come to you. Question that. First of all, why is that? Where is that coming from? But second, what if you would decide you're becoming a learner next time you meet this person? You're going to learn about this person. Or what if you're a facilitator? You're helping them facilitate a process for themselves. You don't have to fix it. So really questioning what your role is. Empaths are sometimes also very good at avoiding. So self-reflective practice, I think, starts with questioning, why am I responding the way I am responding? And I think for empathic people, that is super important. Linking back to empathic leadership, we feel a lot of empathic leaders feel that they have to help all the time. But this is not so helpful. It can really create a culture where everybody's helping everybody, but nobody's actually addressing the problems behind it that create the need for this help. So questioning the roles that you play and why is one thing I think that you can do as a reflective practice. I think especially because I'm understanding, I'm not sure, but if I understand Owen, he himself sounds like an empathic person. So I think for a lot of naturally empathic people, the question around belonging, what is the relationship between showing empathic behavior or caring for others and your own need for belonging? I have a big history with that. I realized one point, like a lot of my empathy is invested in finding belonging. And when is that healthy? And when is that serving myself and other people? And when does it not? Because it can get in your way. So that's another thing. When is empathy getting in your way? And to reflect on that. And when is it coming from your values and from a good place inside yourself? And when is it actually not so facilitative for who you want to become and grow into? And for other people as well. If you always keep tying your kids' laces, will they ever tie their own laces? So I think that's maybe a starting point to self-reflect the why and where am I coming from and what is a different approach to that. And challenge yourself a little bit, and that's not easy, but I like self-challenge a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you, Minu. So much good advice. Let's pop. I know there's a couple more questions coming up. Pop them up. I think that you're right. That self-reflection is really critical. And one of the key things is to slow down enough to do that, right? We're always so busy running. Danny, I can see here, not so much a question, but more of a comment there. Emotions and a sense of responsibility affect our level of listening. I couldn't agree more, Danny. One of the biggest questions we look at in some of my own workshops is what stops you from listening well? I have around 8 sort of insights that I've identified from my audiences around the world. If you want them, just drop me a note. I'll send them to you afterwards. But you're absolutely right that your emotional state and your responsibility to others are 2 of them. When you are feeling responsible for others, or indeed if there's anything on your mind, whether that's some type of feeling that's associated with a negative emotion, it could be sadness, it could be grief, it could be discomfort of any form, or whether it's the opposite, you're absolutely joyful or you're really excited about something, it can be very hard to be present, which is one of the key parts of empathy, right, Minu? We have to be present to empathize.
Yes, absolutely. And that presence and that presence, oftentimes, like Danny said, is blurred or can be blurred or affected by emotions and our own sense of responsibility. And I think what matters really, really here is understanding the relationship between feelings, thoughts, and actions. If your feelings really and your thoughts, they interact, but your feelings really influence the kind of thoughts you have, or the other way around, and that eventually leads to action. So if you feel that your feelings are not, or your thoughts are not inducing the kind of behavior that would be most useful in a situation, then maybe it's good to look at your thoughts. What thoughts am I having right now? Oh shit, I have to solve something. What is going on? Or I feel so anxious, or there's a lot going on in my head. Okay, what thoughts can I change? Literally in the moment. That's another very great exercise to do, challenging. Because it means also taking ownership of what is going on in yourself and say, okay, what other thoughts can I create in the here and now that will influence how I feel, and therefore I will act differently? Okay, so I can say, you know what? Instead of I feel really anxious, I like to say, when I'm nervous about something, what I like to say to myself is like, my body is getting ready for this engagement. My body is getting ready for going on stage. My body is getting ready for this interview. So I changed the narrative. The narrative is not like, oh, I'm so scared. No, the narrative can be, this is my body. I have a kick-ass body. It's just feeling, this feeling I'm feeling is just getting ready for the exercise. So what are the thoughts that you create? Because if you create different thoughts and that you have control over, you change your feelings and you can change your response. And I really, really, really believe in that.
Amazing. Danny, I will share or late. I'm going to ask my colleague Vinery, who I know is watching, to make sure she knows who you are and where I can find you, and we will share them with you afterwards. I wanted to add a small example there, and please do leave Dr. Nicoline's question up because I'm going to answer it, Nicoline. But to Minu, to your point, I shared with someone just yesterday. They asked me, how do I overcome nerves when I'm going on stage? And I told them a very similar thing to what you just said. And I explained to them that from a neuroscience point of view, the brain actually absorbs anxiety, so nervousness. It actually identifies it the same as excitement, right? But our conscious brain deciphers between the two because we know the context, right? We know the context is I'm going on a stage, there's 1,000 people, or there's my boss, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So our conscious brain identifies that feeling in the body as anxiety and therefore a negative association, okay? But the actual brain cannot tell the difference. So if you just retune your thinking, which is what you were just saying, Minu, to this is excitement, it totally changes the experience, right? And you will find very quickly that you're like, oh yeah, I do feel excited because it is the same physical experience, right? So I love what you said there.
And there's actually, during my studies, it's a long time ago, but I read about a research project they did with a group of men crossing a hanging bridge over a ravine and measuring what goes physically onto in their bodies and what is the story they're telling themselves, right? So the first group is actually crossing this bridge and they feel all super scared. And so they measure what's going on in their bodies and they narrate what they were feeling and thinking. And there was a control group. It's a bit of a strange story, but the control group had a bunch of women in bikinis across the bridge. And there was a group of men crossing, and they had a very different narrative of that experience because part of their brain and they were excited. There was an excitement going on, and they had a completely different story. But still, what was going on physically
physiologically.
It was the same. And I thought that's where, for me, and this was in my early 20s, where I started realizing the impact of the story that we tell ourselves. And as empaths, we are so good in making stories, like amazing stories about other people and ourselves and who we need to be and who other people are and what their problems are, what they need help with. So challenge your stories. Maybe that's also maybe in the answer to Owen earlier. Question the stories you make. Question the story making.
Yeah, I love that. Dr. Nicoline, you've been patiently waiting. I hope you're still there. What would the evolution of empathy be? That is such a good question. And it's a really big question. And because I know a little bit about Dr. Nicoline's career and what she does, I don't know her personally, but I know her work. I have some context of why you might be asking that, because I know you're a big, wide, visionary thinker, Nicoline, and you do a lot in education as well. It's a big question. Minu, we definitely didn't prepare for this one. Not that we prepared for any of them, but this is like big thinking. What do you think the answer to that is? What do you think the evolution of empathy is?
I like to believe, maybe that's where it starts. I like to believe that we all have a much greater capacity to connect with each other empathically. Mm-hmm. And I think the evolution of empathy maybe could start or has to start with recognizing that it's a priority.
Yeah. Nice.
If you look at what is going on in the world and all the big questions in the world and the biggest challenges in the world, how high is empathy on the ladder of priorities? It's not. Look at Gaza, look at Ukraine. There's so much going on in the world. And other countries, look at Sudan, Congo. Mm-hmm. Where is empathy on the ladder of priorities when it really gets tough in this world? So I think maybe the evolution of empathy starts with collectively choosing empathy as a top priority, not something that we compromise when things get difficult or people disagree with each other. So maybe that is one thing. The evolution of empathy is, I think, developing collectively our skills to connect, and I think their intuition also plays a big role. The evolution of empathy. But the vision that comes to mind in my head is the movie Avatar, the first Avatar movie.
Yeah, so much. I totally resonate with that, because I was going to say, if I had to put it into a word, I would say the evolution of empathy would be connection.
Yeah,
which is a very similar thing to what I'm hearing you say as well. Connection and collaboration at scale.
Yes.
And, as we started this story in refugee camps, that is what you see when everything else is gone, when there is nothing left, and we revert to all that we have, which is shared humanity, because we don't have food and we don't have water and we don't have light and we don't have comfort and we don't have anything else. We revert to our common humanity. And when we do that, we find connection, right?
Yeah,
so it's
have each other eventually.
It's all we have, right? So actually the evolution of this would be to go back to what makes us human. I feel like that's quite mind-boggling, even though I just said that, right? That's like a big thought. But imagine, how many lives could we save if we were able to get to that connection at scale, without having to lose everything to get there, right? And you said earlier, I think, Minu, I'm paraphrasing now, but something about when will this make it on the agenda? When will we keep it on the agenda, regardless of what happens, stress or tension or money or finance or politics getting in the way. So Dr. Nicoline, if you're still there, drop us a comment, let us know what you think and whether we answered your question. I know there's another one, and to the audience, we are a little bit over. So I did promise you 30 minutes and we're at 40, but there's so many questions that I don't want to miss them, Minu. So if you're happy to carry on, Minu, we'll take good for you. Owen is back. Owen, we love you being here. Thank you for all your questions. Owen asks, what strategies can one use to stay empathetic when you are personally stressed or overwhelmed? Really good question. Minu, do you have an answer?
Yeah, I think what is good here to separate is your own needs and there's a situation. And if you feel that you are personally stressed or overwhelmed, that affects, like we talked about earlier, right? Your thoughts and your feelings so much that it really impacts how you show up. And in this case, if you want to stay empathic, but you feel that your stress and your overwhelm are getting in the way, if you can, and if you are in the circumstances that offer this possibility, I would really step away and deal with your stress and overwhelm first, deal with feelings first, and then with the situation. It's the same, like when somebody comes to me who is really angry, who is really stressed and overwhelmed, right? I'm turning it around. Somebody comes to me who's stressed and overwhelmed. We can talk about the subject that we're here for to talk about, but I like to park all the subjects in a drawer with a big lock on it and deal with the emotion first, deal with the stress, at least in the moment, navigating it, even if it's a long-term stressor, but the overwhelm in the moment, deal with the emotion first, park the subject. I think also in dealing with other people, dealing with ourselves, separate the subject from your feelings and overcome that first so you can come. If you're stressed, there's a lot of influence of your brain. There's a lot of things when you're stressed and overwhelmed. Your amygdala becomes very loud, but you want that captain in your prefrontal cortex to be present and be on the wheel. So deal with the emotion first, park the subject as much as you can. Once you feel that you can come from a different place, then re-engage with the subject. And I think also what can help is verbalizing that, saying that out loud. I'm going to park this subject right now, whatever. I'm going to deal with this first, do that, and then feel that you can pick up the subject later when you are from a different mindset that is more open to solutions, that is more open to connection, to connecting with another person, to listening to that person. But start with, where are you coming from? And what is your and the attitude that you're bringing to this engagement when you're stressed and overwhelmed? Take ownership of that.
Yeah, take ownership. Thank you, Minu, for sharing. And Owen, I would add that two things. Number one, empathy has two great enemies. One is high stress and the other is low time. When we are high on stress and short on time, as you sort of touch on here, and as Minu touched on there, the brain actually cannot empathize. We probably don't have time to go into the neuroscience of it in detail, but fundamentally, when you're experiencing a high amount of stress on the brain, the parts of the brain, as Minu was touching on there, that allow you to empathize actually are not really switched on, as it were. So recognizing that, I think, is really important. The second thing I would say, and we don't have a huge amount of time to talk about self-empathy this evening or this morning, depending which time zone you're in, but your own self-empathy is your ability to understand how you are feeling, how you are experiencing a scenario. And in the end, the reality is we cannot empathize with others if we do not know how to empathize with ourselves. So perhaps Minu and I should come back and do a session on self-empathy. I can see Dr. Nicoline did drop us a comment back. Thank you for staying. So she says, thank you for the beautiful conversation, Mimi and Minu. That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? You are awesome. I love these ideas you shared of collective development to develop our empathy, connection, collaboration at scale, and shared humanity. What makes us human? Yes, it does. It makes us human. And that's why I just love this work and meeting people like Minu across the world in that shared humanity, right? In that shared connection. And from the minute I met Minu, I wanted to have this conversation. We've had it ourselves on this platform because of that shared collective vision and energy for the future. So Minu, as we sort of close down, because we have been chatting beautifully for 45 minutes, what's your hope for empathy? What's your hope for your business and the reason you do what you do? What would you like to see more of in the world?
Maybe that goes down to the skill set. That empathy is not a scary thing. It is not, it can be overwhelming. It can be a little bit lacking, but everybody can learn. It is inherently human, and everybody can learn to connect with each other and with ourselves. Like you said, if empaths would give themselves what they give other people, they might feel very different about themselves and take care of themselves very differently. So I think if there's one thing I could download into the world, it is into everybody, it would be the skill set of applying empathy in everyday life, at work, at home, with ourselves and with other people. Yeah.
Amazing. And if people want to find you, of course, we've put your website down there. We've put your LinkedIn, obviously you're tagged in this post as well. Just tell everybody what you do and how they can do something with you if they want to, what type of work you're doing.
So I really help leaders to develop their empathic leadership skills. So that is a combination of coaching and training skills, learning the skills, practicing the skills, and being coached on your progress. But that can also be a wider leadership development package. And other than that, I think you can find me on functionalempathy.com. That's really where we explain the concept of functional empathy and those 8 roles that people generally seem to be taking on, whether you're an empath or not. So that's maybe very interesting. And my own website, minuhexport.com, but for sure my LinkedIn, where we have a nice newsletter where we always talk about empathy. So that would be a way to connect with me, and anybody who feels inspired to become a better empathic leader, then I guess you know where to find me.
Amazing. And what country are you in, just so people know where in the world you are?
I work all over the world online, but I'm based in Norway, in Oslo.
So you're on the European side of the planet, because people always says to me, where are you today? And actually for all of you, today I am in Malaysia. So it is such a pleasure to be able to link the East and the West in these conversations. And for me, the reason I do this work, and I'm so happy to see some of you here with us tuning in and taking part, is because I deeply believe that the more the world talks about empathy, the more empathy the world will have. And any excuse for me to say that again one day of the week is a good one. So Minu, thank you for giving me the chance to say it and to learn from you and just to have this conversation, because it's my own life's work. I know it's your life's work, and to find new friends across the world that want to share this with the world and talk about it is an absolute pleasure. So I want to really thank you for your time, that you've cut away nearly an hour to talk to our shared audiences about how we can change the world, reconnect the world, and just fill some of those gaps. Because, you know, everyone, if you focus on the difficult stuff, if you focus on the negative things, if you focus on the volcano that's potentially erupting in Italy, or the wars that Minu has mentioned, or the starving children, or the violence, or anything else that's out there, we're never going to make any progress. So for me, what we have to do as leaders of today and tomorrow is focus on where we can make a change, the skill sets that we can take on board to reconnect our people and our world. And people like Minu are doing an amazing, amazing job. So Minu, thank you very much for being here. And hopefully we can talk soon.
Yes, we talk soon. And it was really nice connecting with you today on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone that was here, thank you so much for being here and for supporting our work. And have a really lovely rest of your day further. Bye, everyone. Bye, Magda. Bye, everyone.